You can listen to The Professional Left wherever you get your podcasts, on Netroots Radio, or at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There's a PayPal button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
This is the podcast for November 19th, 2021. It's not safe for work.
Recorded live from the Cornfield Resistance, where we may be the last media corporation in America which has not rolled out the red carpet for Chris Christie. It's The Professional Left with Drift Glass and Blue Gal. Oh my God, he's everywhere, Blue Gal. He's right behind you.
It's such a simple explanation for why Chris Christie is everywhere except the Professional Left podcast.
Why don't you share that explanation with us, Blue Gal?
Well, the Professional Left podcast is not owned by CBS Viacom.
Oh, not yet. I mean, we got the for sale sign up, but no takers yet.
We've accepted a bid. No, we have not.
Yeah.
Chris Christie has a book out promising to save the Republican Party from Trump.
Yeah, too late.
Twitler,
Yeah.
Adolf Twitler. And that book is published by Threshold Books.
I've heard of them. They're one of those liberal public.
No, they're the conservative imprint.
Oh, yeah. That was founded by Mary Madeline. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Anyway, they published Tucker Carlson, Mark Levin, the late Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, John Bolton, Dick Cheney, Tom Fitton of, Judicial Watch, Michelle Malkin, and Karl Rove. And they are owned by CBS Viacom, which also owns Comedy Central.
Okay.
So you want your book promoted on The Daily Show and the CBS Morning Show and there's just such an incestuous hand washing, I'll wash your hand, you wash mine, that I'm sure they don't even ask the question anymore.
No.
It's, here is Janie or whatever her name is, the publicist for Threshold called and wants this person on.
Mm-hmm.
And so you automatically say yes, because you want to put your book when George Stephanopoulos writes a book or whoever else writes a book, they want to put their book on The Daily Show, right?
Right. They want
That's why Chris Christie was on The Daily Show this week.
Yeah. Yes, he was.
It's all owned by Viacom. So that's the reason why Chris Christie's everywhere. And as my boss, John Amato over at Crooks and Liars said, the mainstream media always has a soft spot for repentant Republicans.
Right.
Even ones that left office with a 14% overall approval rating.
Yeah, there's
like
that.
Chris Christie.
Yeah, he didn't go out in a blaze of glory.
No.
He went out like a sack of wet cement hitting the concrete.
Oh, remember that press conference that he had as governor?
Oh, yeah.
Where you could just tell he thought he was doing a great job, and he was just digging and digging and digging. Yeah. Oh.
Well, and that's the problem. You remember it. I remember it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else does. Well, I'm sure all of the dirty liberals out there remember it. But
yeah, sure.
Nobody else does. And Chris Christie is a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And he's being given what I once called and still do call the full Gingrich, which is you have a Republican politician, a prominent Republican politician who is mouthy and a bully and an asshole and who has risen to some prominence and is a national figure, falls from power. Rightly so, because he's an asshole and you can't trust him and he has no conscience and he'll say anything. And rather than hitting the ground and disappearing into it like a respectable person would, somebody picks him up and dusts him off and says, I can resell this. And so like David Gregory did for Newt Gingrich way back when David Gregory was running Meet the Press, back when Meet the Press was David Gregory either quoting David Brooks' columns and then asking guests what they think of them, or having David Brooks on and reading David Brooks' columns to David Brooks and asking him what he thinks of them. The number one guest for an entire year on Meet the Press was Newt Gingrich. This is post Newt Gingrich being exposed as a racist, bomb-throwing asshole. And it didn't matter at all because the host, very much like with Chris Christie, never bothered to mention the reason why Newt Gingrich was shoved out of power.
Was a former House Speaker rather than House Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, tell me more about these racist things that you have on your mind.
Tell me about your 6-year affair with Callista. Tell me about check kiting with the House Post Office.
Well, yeah, and tell me about what is it about colonialism and the mosque, the ground zero mosque that we shall be afraid of? And aren't you the guy who said after a woman murdered her child that that's just what liberals do? You know, aren't you the sort of the godfather of the shithole that we now all find ourselves in? That is, all of that is true. And all of that is relevant. And all of that is absolutely part of Newt Gingrich's character. That is his character. He's an awful, despicable, bottom-feeding scumbag. But he has friends in the media who will dust him off and put him back in a little chair and ask him softball questions.
Well, and he will speak in semi-intelligent sound bites, as you have said many times.
Yeah. Yep.
Newt Gingrich looks around and realizes he's the smartest person in the Republican room.
Right. And he will speak in eloquent, for a Republican, eloquent sound bites. He will get in the company limousine and show up to the studio ready to go into the makeup chair and speak in sound bites that leave room for commercials. He knows how to be a guest on those shows. And that is worth covering up for him because it's easy to get him. He'll show up. He'll be, a draw for a certain white audience that they need to sell the pharmaceuticals that they sell in between segments. And that's it. Well, and as I say often on occasions like this, when my wife says stuff like this, is because no mere liberal could get on television and say things that are smart and pithy and can be.
They do it, but when Marcos Molitzis did it, he insulted everybody and and that's not, you're not allowed to actually insult people who are sitting right there on the show.
No, we're all friends here. That's why everyone smiles all the time on television, because we're all friends here.
Real liberals don't go to Politicon.
No.
Or certainly don't get paid to go to Politicon.
Well, and I do want to mention that Lawrence Tribe, who says a lot of good things all the time, was among others, among the many people who said all kinds of gushy stuff about Nicole Wallace, her journalistic courage for putting Chris Christie on the air and letting him pimp his book, and then asking him actual inconvenient questions about his slobbering support of Trump until, 5 minutes ago. And my question about this is not, look at the heroism of Nicole Wallace, who's willing to... No, it's why did she put him on the air in the first place?
Because she's required to by the suits upstairs because of CBS Viacom. That's why.
Well, and I truly believe it's because they both benefit from this.
Yeah.
She, by asking basic journalistic questions, which of course just don't get asked anywhere anymore, she's the standout. She's a hero. She's a warrior for the resistance. Oh my God, you asked Chris Christie about Donald Trump. Holy shit. No one's ever done that before.
Well, and she made him look ridiculous because he said he didn't watch Tucker Carlson.
Right.
And then he was on Tucker Carlson.
Right. Well, but here's the important part for me. She made him look ridiculous to an audience of liberals. Nobody who's watching MSNBC is like, I had good feelings about Chris Christie until I saw him on. He's like, oh, this asshole, what the fuck? Oh, look, she's kicking him in the balls a little bit. That's great. But for her, it gets to increase her credibility among liberals, so that when she invites Rick Wilson and Steve Schmidt, it's like, oh, okay, I have more credibility to lend to my friends as I rehabilitate their careers. Chris Christie gets to go right across the street and say,
Tucker Carlson.
I went into the belly of the beast, man. I went to the devil's house. I sat across his kitchen table and I kicked his ass.
All right, but Driftglass, you and I had a conversation earlier this week about alternative histories.
We did.
And and maybe we'll record this for Thanksgiving or whatever down the road. Talking about what would have happened if in 2008 we as Democrats had unlimited, 60 Senate seats, 62 Senate seats.
Sure.
Obama was able to do everything he wanted. And we were actually able to help Main Street as much as Wall Street after the 2008 crash.
Yep.
Assuming that Obama wanted to do that.
Right.
And would we still have QAnon and a Tea Party as a result? And you and I agreed that when a black man puts his hand on the Bible, that's what brings about the Tea Party.
Game over. Yeah.
And Glenn Beck used his, airtime and airspace to capitalize on the fear of that.
Absolutely. The
NRA
did.
And so all of the good that we do as Democrats to try to improve people's lives is thankless, and you might as well get used to that.
Right. It will always be a shitty job to be a Democrat, a liberal.
Right. A liberal. Yeah.
And yeah, we really should probably carry a microphone with us wherever we go. We had a wonderful time. It was like, well, yeah, but what if Barack Obama had a bunch of other senators other than Joe Lieberman who would, shiv him in the back?
And we had a public option, and we had
a public option.
Yeah.
And we had other things that, because the problem with the Affordable Care Act was that, Bill Kristol back in 1994, whatever it was, that he wrote the strategy paper to kill Hillary Care.
Mm-hmm.
The strategy wasn't because a bad idea that people wouldn't like it. It was like, holy shit, people might like this stuff, and then they'll like Democrats, and then we're screwed. So we have to prevent Democrats from passing things that people want and need.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
that's still the strategy.
Yeah, which is a typical Bill Kristol way of thinking.
And it's like, a way to bring about cynicism in the public.
Absolutely. And it works.
So that you don't support Democrats.
And so the contempt for Barack Obama and the monumental mistake he made was thinking that if he met the Republican Party on their own 20-yard line and said, we're going to take Romney Care that you guys all love and the American Enterprise Institute version of healthcare that you guys all love, and we're going to add a public option to it because you got to have competition from a non-corporate actor, and we're gonna do this stuff, that they would say, oh, okay, that's really cool. That'll help 50 million Americans. They said, oh God, you want to murder my grandmother.
Yeah,
what?
Right.
You're going to let this black man murder your sainted white grandmother? Oh my God, he's a Kenyan communist to boot.
Mm-hmm.
There was never a chance. The Republican Party was so far gone by the time Barack Obama was president that only the never Trumpers didn't see it.
Right,
only people who were deeply invested in lying to themselves about the state of the Republican Party, either out of a sense of wearing rose-colored glasses and this sort of like getting high on your own supply belief in America. If we all just were united under one, I think that's what Barack Obama actually believed when he was sworn in.
He did. The United States of America, not red, blue America, blue America. Right.
We're in the middle of this incredibly bad economic collapse, and we're trying to get the hell out of a war that these assholes started, lied us into, and then fucked up. And if we just do things that help the country and then point to them and say we're helping the country, that will be sufficient. And the Republican Party is a completely different species from that. They don't want Democrats to succeed. And so they will actively sabotage good things that Democrats are trying to do for the American people. And they've got 70 million brainwashed meatheads who will just believe anything that Tucker Carlson shits into their skull. So they just turn him loose on Barack Obama. And suddenly, he's being swarmed by the people he's trying to help who are calling him a communist. And he can't figure out what the hell just happened. And that would have been worse, actually. If Barack Obama had succeeded, it then becomes even more than he did. And he did get a lot of good stuff done. Because Republicans thrive on hating the left, it would have been necessary to make him an even greater villain than he already was. So the only way you keep the meatheads in the tent is by telling them that the monster outside, the liberal commie monster outside, is so big and so terrifying, they dare not leave the tent. So you need to keep escalating the threat outside the tent to keep the morons in the tent. And if Barack Obama had actually succeeded in doing even more than he did, it would have been necessary to make the Democrats even bigger communists than we already are.
Right.
And
this reminds me of another alternative history that I'd like to posit to you.
Sure.
Involving Chris Christie.
Okay.
Because Chris Christie was in charge of the transition.
Yes, he was.
From Obama to Trump, which is kind of hilarious. And he claims to Axios, of course, that he had 4 vetted candidates, Republican vetted people that would be approved by everybody from Rupert Murdoch to the Heritage Foundation.
Sure.
For each cabinet position and each cabinet level position. And if Donald Trump had said, look, and this was a joke on Saturday Night Live, right? Where Trump turns to Pence and says, you're going to do everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was a basic Republican administration that has its, failures and so forth. But Trump goes out and does rally after rally after rally. And Pence goes back and signs the stuff for Republican tax cuts and, the thing they got done, tax cuts for billionaires. But there might have been an infrastructure bill.
Might have been.
There might have been.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, if they had listened to Chris Christie, I wonder if Trump would still be president today.
First of all, I don't believe Chris Christie had such a list.
You think that's a lie? That's interesting.
I don't see any reason to believe Chris Christie about anything. I want to see your list. I want to see the people who signed on to it and who were ready to go at a moment's notice when you were on there. I just the idea that, well, let's just assume that he was telling the truth. I don't see any reason to assume Chris Christie or any other Republicans telling the truth about anything.
Okay.
So, but let's assume that he had such a list.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would have made any difference at all, because eventually, if you put the rotten apple in the barrel with the good apples, the rotten apple wins.
Mm-hmm.
It's you keep Donald Trump is plutonium,
mm-hmm.
and wherever you put him, he's going to pollute it.
Yeah.
And the culture that he brings with him, the mob, racist, cruel, asshole, sexist culture that he reeks of, just goes everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no way he would tolerate anyone, in his administration telling him anything he didn't want to hear. He's basically, the Republican base come to life.
Mm-hmm.
And as the Republican base suddenly has access to the nuclear codes and is suddenly sitting in the Oval Office, going to listen to these sober-minded strategists of the Republican establishment?
Mm-hmm.
No, because they want a wall, goddammit.
Mm-hmm.
I want a fucking wall. I want a wall, and I want Democrats to suffer, and I want to take kids away from their parents at the border.
Mm-hmm.
And it just was never in him. The counterfactual is not if Chris Christie had shown up with a list of viable candidates. The counterfactual is if Donald Trump weren't Donald Trump.
Right.
Would he be? Would things have been different? Yeah, that would have been. He would have been, Mitt Romney.
You would still have the cabinet meeting where people have to go around and praise Donald Trump,
right,
and pray for Donald Trump and be grateful for their job to Donald Trump. And some people would not have maybe some competent Republicans who actually knew how to run their department would have balked at that and left.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and would Donald Trump have colluded with the Russians during the 2016 election?
Right.
Yes, he would have.
Yeah.
Would there have been an investigation of it? Probably so.
Mm-hmm.
Would that have made him even more deranged? Yes, it would have.
Mm-hmm.
Would that derangement have ricocheted into all future action once his own party told him, you can do anything you want, we're never going to hold you accountable? Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
So this is a 10-corner bank shot, but I bet on human nature every time.
Right.
And Donald Trump is just a filthy human being, a despicable, monstrous manifestation of the Republican soul. And eventually, that's going to come out to play. Because what the base has always wanted is someone who will sit in the White House and talk like they talk and act like they act.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's always been the way the Republican Party has kept them in the tent, which is telling them, whisper, whisper, Lee Atwater style,
right?
Your racism is really cool.
It's okay.
And your paranoia is great. And Democrats really are just awful. And we probably should find a way to liquidate them or at least put them in camps. But we can't really say that out loud, although Rush Limbaugh can.
Sure, plenty of times.
And so
and he was their spokesperson.
He was their voice. He was the Republican base. He was the
one that could say what they couldn't say out loud.
And what drove Republicans mad was that they kept being told on the radio and on Fox News that it's okay to be the assholes that they were. And Democrats were the enemy. And they kept being told by the leader of their party that, shut up, just tax cuts and judges. That's all we care about. And those two things cannot be reconciled because Republican base voters want to destroy the country and rebuild it as a theocracy.
Fake Christian theocracy. Yeah.
And
Mitt
Romney wants to run it like Bain. And Mitt Romney wants to run it like Bain Capital.
Yeah.
And those two things are, those
Sell
two
it
things
for parts,
yeah, those two things can't coexist peacefully. One of them is going to win, and my money's always with the mob. There's more of them, and because there's no profit to be made in feeding the 0.01% of the Republican Party who wants to be like Mitt. There's no profit to be made in telling Charlie Sykes is not your audience.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. Charlie Sykes is the mouthpiece to speak to your audience. Your audience are people who want red meat all the time. And there's no money to be made in de-escalating that because they're going to go find another person who will give them even better drugs. So and
there's always a market for that. There's always more money to be made I mean, we're seeing that. If you notice how Politico and some other outlets are covering what's going to be lit, the Republican primaries, it turns out that they actually, one of them, I'm sorry, I don't remember which one, but I laughed when I read it this morning because it was to the effect of there are a lot of safe Republican districts in Arizona.
Yeah.
And so wannabe Republican congressional candidates who just want to start a political action committee, announce a candidacy, and rake it in,
right,
are going there and moving there to run for Congress.
Well,
and the QAnons are moving to Arizona to run for Congress for money. It is absolute corruption.
Do you remember the character on Murphy Brown?
I
think it was Stuart Best, I think is his name.
Yeah.
Played by your erstwhile theater husband,
fake boyfriend,
Wallace Shawn. Who ran for Congress. Actually, slavery was a good idea.
Yeah.
And this is a former colleague of Murphy Brown's on this fictional show, and she's horrified by what he's saying because he's on camera saying the most deranged, batshit, MAGA shit you can imagine. And during the break, he's like, "Please help me. I ran for politics because I wanted a dental plan. I haven't had my teeth fixed in 20 years. I just wanted money. And I got involved with people who actually overthrow countries who will kill me
if I don't say these things." Right.
And it's like, oh, that was the Republican Party.
Yeah.
That's who runs for office now. Those kind of people who are like, look, I will do what I used to be in the alley giving blowjobs to Republican candidates for money. Now I would like to have a more steady job, so I'm running for one of those jobs. I have no moral conscience. I will say anything to anyone. I do a lot of drugs. I worship Satan on the weekends. But I found a political party that'll put me in office, and all I have to do is.
And if you can't survive in that milieu, you can always be like Milo Yiannopoulos and go sell. You know what he's doing now? He's selling Blessed Virgin statuettes on the right-wing church YouTube, QVC channel.
Right. And my question is, when is he going to show up on Bill Maher's show again?
Yeah, again.
With his wonderful new products. Because this is QVC for fascists.
Right.
This is just, there's an infinite demand on the part of 70 or 80 million Americans to be told that they are under siege by dirty commie liberals, and that the only thing that will save them is this. It might be your protein pack from Pat Robertson.
Right.
It might be the John Boehner Memorial butt plugs you can get on some show. It might be, who knows what it's some product or service or ideology or something.
Horst Wormer, Driftglass.
Yes, Horst Wormer.
Horst Wormer and borax baths will save you.
That's worth that you can either get for $69.95 or you can get by casting your vote for so-and-so, or you can get by clicking on this button, or you can get by watching this show. And it's holding those morons in place, and they won't stay still unless you keep feeding them better drugs. And the Republican Party was fucked by 1992. This game was over. This ball was rolling downhill, and it could have been stopped. It could have been stopped at any point up until maybe 2000 or 2004 if the people who kept telling us that no such problem existed in the Republican Party had gotten up and said, we need to stop this. We need to, they all shine up their resumes by talking about how boldly Bill Buckley kicked the Birchers out of the party. Well, he kicked them out of the front door and welcomed them back in the side door.
Okay, let me ask you another question, Dirk.
Sure. But let me just remind everyone, that was 60 years ago.
Yeah.
What happened to you that you couldn't kick Newt Gingrich out of the party in 2002? What happened to you that you couldn't kick Rush Limbaugh? Oh, they were making you money. Oh, I get it. And this is why, the only one I listen to at all, really, on the right, when I listen to their soul come out at night and talk, is Stuart Stevens.
Yeah.
Because at least he's willing to say, look, it was all a lie. All the things I ran on, all the things that my party said they believed, they never believed any of it. It was all a lie. So, I'm sorry.
I kept telling myself it was okay because I was succeeding at what I did.
Right.
And exactly. I know that. Yeah. But let me ask you this. Because it seems incredibly short-sighted, the whole critical race theory thing.
You mean forced busing?
Well, yeah, there you go.
You mean integrating classrooms?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even during busing, all right, if you're talking about that one back then, there was no social media back then.
True.
And I just feel that the political party that is pushing this as a winning issue for them in 15 months doesn't know any teenagers at all. Doesn't know anyone who is 18, just turning 18 at all.
No, they don't. Back when I was a teenager, Blue Gal, you had to dial up the White Power hotline for $2 a minute if you wanted to listen to this kind of bullshit.
Well, I said this to you several times, like every time it comes on the news about, so-and-so, the state of North Dakota is banning critical race theory. And they very specifically tell on themselves by saying this includes any discussion of equality or something slavery and something. And it's like, oh, you really have researched this enough to know exactly what the kind of white supremacy catering to white fragility that you want to accomplish. The state legislature of North Dakota knows exactly what they're trying to protect in terms of white fragility. And you and I looked at one another and I said, but they're going to get this on TikTok.
Right. Yeah, and they don't understand how much the world has changed.
Yeah. Well, in the Federalist Society, there's an article on Vox today that you really need to read, Driftglass. It's about how the Federalist Society is now really, really upset with corporate America.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Because corporate America is siding with Colin Kaepernick rather than...
Let them fight. Let them fight.
And it's like, well, and this article says the reason they're siding with Colin Kaepernick is Nike knows who their customers are.
Hell, yes, they do. Hell, and this is the part that never gets... sort of elucidated because no one who knows what they're talking about is willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
That people who do actual advertising,
they want to make money.
Well, yeah, but there are trade publications out there.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to like the Space Merchants, which is about a science fiction story, a wonderful science fiction story about a polluted, awful world, and it's run by advertisers. And it's about a copy editor who gets cast out into the abyss and has to find out about the real world the hard way and maybe save the world and maybe not, but we hope he will. But it's this and these guys, a lot of these science fiction writers worked in advertising.
Yeah.
And it was like, this guy
actually, Driftglass, the Space Merchants, I think we ought to recommend to everybody that they go and read it.
It's excellent. It's excellent.
If you're having any conversations at all about democratic messaging,
yes,
you'll find out that what our hero, what the protagonist, I will call him a protagonist because he's not necessarily a hero, but he is the main character in the story. And what he discovers is that the freedom fighters don't know how to write copy.
They're terrible at it. They're terrible. Yeah. Yes, they suck. And he's going to help them do that.
And he's going to save them.
Right, from themselves.
Yes.
But because all the money's on the other side.
Right.
And this is planet Earth is basically polluted beyond ability. And this is from 1954, okay?
Yeah, it's written a long time ago.
And all the politicians are associated with the corporations that fund them. You're the congressman from Nash Kelvinator and the senator from DuPont.
Right.
So it's all very, very current. But the idea is that he lets us into the world of advertising. He says there's this book. It's called the whatever. It has the general intelligence of the population broken down by this demographic and that demographic. And it says intelligence has been dropping steadily. He's like, that's a good thing. The stupider they get, the more they'll buy. I mean, I don't understand why this is a negative. This is a positive. And the people who actually do advertising for a living understand to like the 10th significant digit exactly who their audience is and what they'll respond to. And everything you see in a commercial is there for a reason. So, but that never gets talked about in the political universe. Yeah. But these people know exactly who they're talking to, and they know exactly who their base is, and they know exactly what they're going to respond to.
Well, and this is what MAG is so upset about, is seeing mixed race couples in advertising.
It can't stand it.
They can't stand it.
They're still upset over the Star Trek episode where Kirk kisses Uhura. They're still freaked out about that.
from 1967.
Yeah. Oh my God, turn that off. They hold their clammy little hands over their, weird child's eyes. Don't look. And again,
But what I find amazing, Brooke, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No, go ahead.
What I find amazing is in so many of those commercials, you and I look for the wedding ring.
We do.
And, it's like, okay, mixed race couples is a message that we want to promote because we know who our audience is, but we don't want to promote cohabitating mixed race couples because family values. And it's like, okay, you guys really are working on this.
And because your brain notices this. You might not notice, but your brain notices. And your brain notices when dad is with daughter or daughters or kids and doesn't have a wedding ring. It's, single dad.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a group of people. And there's the nice lesbian couple. And there's the nice gay couple that are getting married that you see just flash past you.
Right.
All of which is just like, this is how we see America. This is what we see when we look out the window. And these are the people we like to buy our detergent.
Inclusivity, which is what they're trying to prevent with this anti-critical race theory thing, is antithetical to selling product, to selling laundry detergent.
Well, and what makes me unhappy, but I don't have any control over it, is how the centrists and the middlers and our never Trump friends will talk about, critical race theory technically isn't being taught in the classroom, but it's adjacent to all these other issues that Democrats need to take seriously. And sure, it makes, yes, they have a point that this is teaching history, but there's also another point over here about basically, and they're trying not to say, don't make white people feel bad about being white.
Right.
which is hilarious. And I think I'd like to jump ahead to an article I read in the New York Times in 1859.
Yes, please do.
Which is just someone's passing this around on the internet these days. And it hits so many spots. First of all, I will tell you in advance of reading just a section of this, I had no idea that David Brooks had worked at the New York Times in 1859. But it gets to the whiny centrist, why can't both sides calm down? Let's find a middle default setting of the New York Times, which goes back a century and a half. And it is absolutely baked into how they handle anything controversial, especially when it involves race. So this is a paragraph out of the middle of this very long editorial that says the very best thing that could possibly be done towards the abolition of slavery would be, and this is all in italics now, for the North to stop talking about it.
This is for real.
For real. 10 years of absolute silence would do more than 50 of turmoil and hostility towards a peaceful removal of the evil. They recognize it's evil. They just don't want to do anything about it. It's quite possible that the abolition crusade may force a bloody and violent termination of the system, but this no sane man desires. And any other solutions of the problem is infinitely retarded by the incessant intermeddling of parties who have neither responsibility nor power in regard to the subject. The great necessity is to, again more italics, let the South alone, to leave them leisure to think of their own affairs, to throw upon them the necessity of studying their own condition and of looking into their own future. So long as we engross their thoughts by alarming their fears, they have neither the time nor inclination to examine the question except from this single point of view. Do nothing. Keep doing nothing. Say nothing. Stop making white people nervous, and everything will somehow fucking work out, which never, ever, ever happens. And this has been the default position of the New York Times forever. So please don't be surprised when I laugh at you when you tell me about the liberal New York Times. It's not. It's about an establishment that doesn't want anything to be disrupted, doesn't want anything to change, and oftentimes change is very unpleasant. But the idea that if we just sit quietly and do nothing, this is exactly the position that David Brooks takes all the time and Bret Stephens takes all the time. This is the idea of conservatism.
Yeah.
The idea that don't change anything. Let the natural evolution of whatever slowly over time, gradually improve, which is all great when you're on top of the pyramid, when you're not the person being oppressed, when you're not the minority, when you're not women, when you're not poor, when you're not the outsider.
Right.
It works great for you. Just be patient. Eventually, your great-great-great-great-grandchildren might not be slaves. So let's everybody be quiet.
But then you have alternatively, Driftglass, this week. Did you read Max Boot's column about how Biden needs a sister soldier moment?
No, but I can imagine it fully in my mind. Why don't you explain it to me in words? So
Biden needs a sister soldier moment. This is Max Boot's tweet about his column. He needs to attack the far left activists who want to defund the police, boycott Israel, and divide Americans by race.
Fuck you, Max Boot.
Biden should champion liberalism, but not leftism.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a picture of white voters in Virginia, parents for Youngkin.
Right.
You know, it illustrating his post. What you really want to do is make white people comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll win the midterms. That's the point.
That's right. I have yet to hear. I have heard
so go punch a black woman is what you're supposed to do, apparently.
Yeah, well, find one. Find a black person, yell at them for being too extreme, and then you'll make the middle happy.
Right.
I have heard 1,000 times on 1,000 Never Trump allied podcasts about how defund the police is a terrible idea, and you should not be backing legislation.
It's a lie.
What is the number of the House resolution or the Senate bill that's defunding the police? Oh, well, there isn't one. Well, which members of Congress are making it their top? Well, there aren't any. So this is something this is a slogan that angry protesters latched onto because that's how they felt about the police and how they're being treated by the police.
Killing black people. Yes.
And suddenly this is actually the official. This is the number one platform of the Democratic Party and must be denounced by...
But every Republican that voted against the bipartisan infrastructure bill actually voted to deny funding to police departments.
Sure they did.
Yeah.
And the reason Max Boot is all... Because you can't trust Never Trumpers, Blue Gal. You just can't. You just can't.
Never Trumpers.
It never occurs to them, and now I'm repeating myself, it never occurs to them that to be a good ally... If you're new to the cause and you're putting yourself in the middle of people who've been fighting against you for 30 years because you've been wrong, maybe the decent, humble, contrite thing to do would be to shut up and let them continue doing the good work they've been doing, and you get behind them and help them rather than sitting on the couch with your feet up bitching that no one's doing what you want them to do. That's not that's what a pain in the ass does. That's what a bad house guest does. But all I hear from these people is what Democrats need to do. No. Well, here's what Democrats need to do. They need to run on the Republican Party is a cancer on this country. They need to run against the Republican Party as a whole. And Max Boot's every goddamn column should be about what a colossal failure. And you know who actually did this week?
Who?
Jennifer Rubin.
Oh, she owes you $5.
Who keeps owing us $5. Can I read you just a chunk of her column?
Sure.
I never thought I would live in a timeline. Again, let me be very clear. I don't trust these people. I think they will turn on me in a minute. But at this moment, I don't want her to run my party. Right. I don't want her to have any say over policy. But at this moment, here's a column that reads like a liberal blog from 2005. And it's her today in the Washington Post. It's not polarization. We suffer from Republican radicalization. Listen to political scientists, pollsters, and well-meaning elected officials, and you'll likely hear a lot of chatter about polarization. That characterization of our current political environment misses the point and is even dangerous. While it's true that the country is more deeply divided along partisan lines than it has been in the past, it is wrong to suggest a symmetrical devolution into irrational hatred. The polarization argument too often treats both sides as equally worthy of blame, characterizing the problem as a sort of free-floating affliction, i.e. lack of trust. This blurs the distinction between a Democratic Party that is marginally more progressive in policy positions than it was a decade ago, and a Republican Party that routinely lies, courts violence, and seeks to define America as a white Christian nation. The Republican Party's tolerance of violence is not matched by the Democrats, nor is the Republican Party's refusal to recognize the sanctity of elections. Democrats did not call the elections they lost in 2020 and 21 rigged, nor are they seeking to replace nonpartisan election officials with partisan lawmakers. Republicans' determination to change voting laws based on their insistence that Donald Trump won in 2020 election is without historical precedent. The whole article goes on like this.
Mm-hmm.
Republicans are insane, Democrats are not. Republicans are criminals, Democrats are not. Republicans have lost their fucking minds, Democrats haven't. Democrats are a little more liberal than they used to be. Republicans are now a outright goose-stepping fascist
violent
cancer.
Party, that wants white Christian nationalism.
And
absolutely.
The answer to that, to coax the middle, is not to say, and to solve the problem of one party going full bull goose loony fascist is for Joe Biden to find some black person to yell at.
To punch, yeah.
The solution is for Max Boot to write a column saying, "Dear white people, stop fucking around with fascism. I hate you all. I reject the Republican Party. I'm throwing my full support behind Joe Biden and the entire Democratic Party, and I'm going to knock doors for Ocasio-Cortez in the upcoming election because on her worst day, she is less of a threat to democracy than every single goddamn Republican in this country, including Glenn goddamn Youngkin." That's what I'm going to do. And that would be a nice little column Max Boot could write instead of saying, here's the problem. This whole defund the police movement, which doesn't exist, scares white people who watch Fox News.
Right. Jeff Glass, we've gone several episodes Glenn Greenwald free.
I know.
So
and let's keep it up.
All right, moving on.
No, I think someone needs to thank Cousin Avi.
Okay. Alert listener Cousin Avi.
Yeah, I'd like to thank alert listener Cousin Avi for pointing out that Glenn Greenwald flooding Twitter with hot tears because QAnon shaman might get jail time is the definition of win-win. Yeah.
And I just want to do a little riff on what happened at the Cornerstone Church.
Oh, yeah.
In San Antonio this past weekend. There was a gathering there that started to chant, "Let's go Brandon." And Twitter exploded with, how dare they? We need to tax the churches. We need to tax the churches because during this church service, they're chanting, "Let's go Brandon." And isn't that horrifying? Mm-hmm. And as you know, "Let's go Brandon" is the cutesy way that white Christian nationalists say, "Fuck you, Biden."
Right.
I went and looked at that, and a couple other people pointed out that it was not a church service. It was a afternoon rally. It was the rally where Michael Flynn actually talked about, America being a Christian nation, because that's what QAnon wants. This was a QAnon rally.
Right.
And that's what they want to hear is, this is our country and it's a Christian nation and we need Christian values, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so that's where they were chanting, "Let's go Brandon." And that's where the leader and the person on the stage was leading the chant, "Let's go Brandon." It was not during a church service. And as I said in a post that I wrote along with John Amato about this, churches can rent out their facilities to anybody. Mm-hmm. And, oftentimes churches are the largest auditorium in a community, particularly rural communities.
True.
And they use them for graduation services. You and I vote in a church.
We do.
And so, it's not, there is separation of church and state, but there's also an auditorium that you can rent out to anybody. And that's not. Well,
and the church that we vote at redesigned itself in that way to be an auditorium. In fact, one of the many, civic groups I'm a member of meets there.
Right.
And, every meeting we begin with "Death to the West." Yeah. Now, that's not the official position of that Baptist church.
Well, but, and our church, the church that you and I attend, my knitting guild meeting is there. There's a Mensa meeting that meets there. There are community meetings. There's the mayor often has a town hall there. Yep. It's just a place, right? It's a place with a roof and heating and lighting, and you can go there and have a meeting. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't particularly alarming to me that this right-wing Christian organization, so-called QAnon organization, really, rented out this big mega church to do their thing.
Right.
But I went because I know John Hagee, who is the pastor of Cornerstone Church. He is a real poster child for Americans United for the separation of church and state.
Yes, he is.
Going back way back to the John McCain running against Barack Obama in 2008 days. Mm-hmm.
Oh, no,
John Hagee was always talking about, we have to love Israel in order to bring about the second coming of Christ.
Right.
And
when they'll all die, but hey,
right,
that's what happens.
And then they all die in firing furnace if they don't convert to Christianity, right?
And his number one defender, let's not forget, was Joe Lieberman.
Joe Lieberman,
Holy Joe
John
Lieberman,
Hagee. Yeah.
who compared his very good friend, Mensch, if you will, John Hagee, to Moses.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Holocaust supporter.
John Hagee is still alive.
Yeah.
And I
God.
watched the 2-hour service from that day, because it's on YouTube, of John Hagee. And there's a lot of Christian rock, half an hour of it before the sermon. And then there's a sermon, and then there's more music. And then John Hagee, after the sermon, sits down with one of his broadcast assistants and gets interviewed about his new book, which is about planning for the second coming of Christ, or planning for heaven or hell, or whatever it is.
Are you sure it's not planning for the second coming of Christie? Because maybe
whatever.
That's just yeah.
But here is you can get a copy of our book by contributing, and so forth and so on. So it's all marketing. Mm-hmm. But during that interview portion, John Hagee pulls out his binder and starts reading about what a terrible president Joe Biden is during the service, and getting a standing ovation for it. Mm-hmm. So, they rented out the church to the Let's Go Brandon people, and that is fine. But the separation of church and state and the ability to spout politics from the pulpit, John Hagee is just classic. Classic theocrat. And it made me sad, because I realized, if we were to, if the IRS was to raid his church these days and say, look, you can't get a tax deduction because you're sitting here spouting politics, he could just convert his church to a 501c3 political action committee
overnight
and be perfectly legal.
Yeah. And he could make Michael Flynn, who believes the United States should only have one religion, the CEO of his nonprofit, and pour $1 million into his pocket every year. And that's all. That would all be legal. And so
it's all, Citizens United. Welcome to it. I wanted to just say hello and howdy to Heartland Signal.
Yeah.
Which is a new Midwest newsroom. It's actually completely connected at the hip. I didn't realize this until today. Completely connected at the hip to WCPT in Chicago.
Well, that makes sense.
Their newsroom.
Yeah.
But funded by a liberal millionaire. You'll love to see it. So glad to see that.
Mysterious liberal millionaire. Who
no,
knows
I don't
who that
think
is?
He's mysterious. His name's in the article. I didn't write it down, but it's nice to see that there are people who want a Midwest liberal presence in the media.
I was delighted to see the people, good people over at Pod Save America, saying that, hey, look at this. This is pretty cool. We need a liberal infrastructure. We need liberal media in the Midwest. And golly, why isn't there one? And the question that I would have is, you're right. Why isn't there one?
Yeah, because a lot of people on our behalf wrote to the Pod Save America people when they were getting started and said,
there's a little
you could do Pod Save the Midwest, and you've got 2 podcasters ready to do it.
Who were actually podcasting when you were writing dad jokes for Barack Obama.
Right.
So maybe it would be a cool thing to bring. No. They're not on the coast. They don't exist. But
that's
now,
not what they said. We don't know what their reasoning was, but anyway.
And the thing that caught my attention, honestly, Well, I think this is good news. I'm being a bit snarky,
it is good news. It's great news. Yeah.
About 3 comments down in social media, it turned into a discussion of how advertising revenue would be parsed and what the funding source would be and how it would be structured. And it turned into a business meeting, which is fine. But let's first all agree there really should be some form of liberal media somewhere outside of New York, Washington, D.C., and L.A. And that the Midwest is lots of liberals out here. We've got a big city called Chicago. I know. I lived there for 25 years. I can tell you all about it. And that there are a lot of people in the Midwest who could be pithy, who can do things, timed to commercial breaks, who can think on their feet. But because we live in flyover country, we're not seen by our own party and our own movement. And I'd love to remedy that. I would love to point you to other people who are doing a wonderful job. But all in all, this is a wonderful news, which I think pairs nicely with the fact that the Phrenology University of Austin is already losing members, which is so sad.
Oh,
Yeah. The University of Austin, which is an uncredited anti-cancel culture academic project, launched last week by former New York Times columnist, and I think she was the head of the op-ed department too, Barry Weiss, and a number of her intellectual compatriots, has already hit their first speed bump. Apparently, on Monday, University of Chicago Chancellor Robert Zimmer and Harvard professor Steven Pinker announced that they will be parting ways with the institution after initially being listed as two of its advisory board members. As is often the case with a fast-moving fast-moving startup, there were some missteps, the University of Austin wrote in a statement announcing their departure. I didn't know the University of Austin wrote things. I thought a person maybe representing them would write things, but apparently the university itself is sentient and can write things, which is great. But that doesn't surprise me.
No.
It reminds me of the heady early days of The Intercept, when Matt Taibbi wanted to work there, and Glenn Greenwald basically shit all over him and told him to leave, and there was a fight. And then it turns out that the funder is not really happy with the direction that Glenn Greenwald is taking his publication and wants to put people on there to control things. And the people who that Glenn brought in there are like, but we want to... And it was something that nobody had really thought through. It was just, let's throw a lot of money at Glenn Greenwald. $250 million was the initial amount at Glenn Greenwald, and let him just do stuff. And when he started doing stuff the Glenn Greenwald way, a lot of people said, whoa, wait, no, this is not what we had in mind. The Intercept has smoothed out. It's become a interesting publication with a lot of really good resources, and they do some good reporting. And Glenn Greenwald has stomped out the front door and said, I shall never darken your door again, and gone on to be Tucker Carlson's sidekick on Fox News. Tucker
Carlson's sidekick, yes.
So, you live and learn. But it is interesting to see a university defined by what it hates. Maybe having a little trouble achieving a critical mass and a consensus about what it should be teaching, other than other universities suck, and you should come here where you can say anything you want except, insulting Barry Weiss.
You want to say something nice again about Doug J. Balloon?
I really do. I really do. Because the reason this 1859 article op-ed from the New York Times came to my attention is because Doug J. Balloon, better known to people on social media as New York Pitchbot, which is genius, just straight
the New York Times
genius.
Pitchbot.
New York Times Pitchbot. It's just he's found that lane, man. He's really good in there. Got so far ahead of the New York Times curve that he traveled back in time because his parody tweet. This is a parody tweet, mind you. Were abolitionists too woke? A new book by historian Niall Ferguson argues that if anti-slavery Northerners had been less condescending towards slave-owning Southerners, the Civil War might have been averted. This was a parody tweet until someone showed up and said, actually...
That's exactly what the New York Times wrote.
That's exactly what they wrote in 1859. And here's the article. And we all had a big laugh over the fact that we're deeply screwed when it comes to the media and have been for a very long time. But
all right, now the Department of Corrections on Joe Walsh. You want to mention that too?
Yeah. We got a letter from a reader, listener, who likes what we do and is amused and confused by the fact that we would say nice things about Joe Walsh. I thought I had packed my comments in enough qualifiers to make it clear that I do not trust Joe Walsh. I do not think that what he has done with his life is admirable in any way. But that he's trying to do something different than other Never Trumpers. He's trying to bring in different voices than you will ever hear on the Bulwark, the major Never Trump podcast. And that was interesting to me. And that he's willing to acknowledge that the Republican Party problems with the GOP, he was complicit in, and that they date back prior to 2016. But I have listened to enough of his stuff to know that he's a dope and an opportunist who trots out every Beltway cliche. Today I listened to him explain that it's not a Democrat versus Republican issue, when it fucking well is. I heard him talk about, in great gassy terms that would have been, at home on the New York Times op-ed page about what the people want. The people want this and the people want that and the people are frustrated, and the importance of disruption. The system needs to be disrupted. And what about all these independents out there? All stuff I've written about amusingly or not amusingly, but to great length, like independence is a stupid word that means nothing at all. Yeah. Remember the Affordable Care Act was unpopular with, 60% of the people, and nobody bothered to ask, okay, why is it unpopular? Well, it turns out a whole bunch of people on the right thought it was socialism and should die. And a whole bunch of people on the left thought it didn't go nearly far enough.
Yeah.
But they
And
lumped them.
That's what's going on with Biden's numbers right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But people who absolutely know better lump these two completely opposite positions together and say, well, independents think this thing.
Yeah,
Independents.
right.
No.
Yeah.
Half the independents on the left
are frustrated.
Are very frustrated.
Yeah.
The independents on the right want to burn the system down.
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing this to justify his what he calls free market libertarianism. He believes, and I'm not quoting him directly, but I'm quoting him awfully close, that the federal government went off the rails in sometime in the 1870s, and it's only gotten worse ever since because both sides.
Mm-hmm.
But he is doing something different than every other Never Trumper, and I thought that much of his shtick was interesting, and I still do. But do I trust him? Oh, fuck no. I don't trust him as far as I can throw cotton candy underwater.
Right.
But what he is doing is so unusual compared to the absolutely consistent fare from everyone else that I thought it was worth mentioning. And I'll keep monitoring it. I don't trust him. I don't trust any of these people. I don't trust Max Boot. I'm not brokenhearted. Oh my God, Max Boot turned out to be an asshole. No, Max Boot has always been an asshole. Yeah, Max Boot, I was introduced to Max Boot when Steve Gilliard was writing about the fact that he was a war pornographer back in 2004 and 2005. So I'm not shocked that these people always revert to the mean. What they all have in common is that their business model has been disrupted. So they're all scrambling for a way to stay in the spotlight and keep the paycheck coming from the media. And they're all coming to different solutions. So Jennifer Rubin is becoming a 2005 liberal blogger. Max Boot is going left, right, left, right, left, right. Joe Walsh is trying to figure out some way to be a Never Trumper, positioning himself somewhere between, and this is his guest next time, I believe, Cenk Uygur and Tom Nichols. Okay, that's great. Good for you. I'm sure it'll be a wild show. But clearly what they're all doing is they've all been deprived of their source of sustenance, financial sustenance, and their professional standing. And so a bunch of these people were put in on MSNBC because MSNBC wanted to have a whole bunch of Never Trumpers there. And that's the core of these people. That's home base. And the people who couldn't quite grab onto that are trying to figure out some other way to hook into that. And
a lot of them are deciding that fighting with Joe Rogan or having a Joe Rogan themed show is how you get attention and clicks and hits and whatever. And Joe Rogan, like Glenn Greenwald, bores me silly.
Yeah. And when you hear someone, I've said this before, and this is just listen for this. When you hear anyone say, this is not a Democrat versus Republican issue, first of all, that person 9 times out of 10 is going to be a former Republican who doesn't want to take any shit for the fact they're a former Republican and the stink is still on them. Secondly, and this came to me today when I was reading, New York Times PitchBot. This is not an abolitionist versus slavery issue. Yes, it fucking well is. All the people who are fucking everything up are in one party. All the people who are trying to unfuck everything the other party's doing are in the other party. It is, by definition, Democrat versus Republican. And with some rough edges around.
And the fact that they switched party names in 1964 is irrelevant. Dinesh D'Souza.
It's right. And that's why Kevin Cruz will never, be bored, because he has a full-time job on social media, spanking Dinesh D'Souza every time he lies about the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And it's fun to watch, but you get the impression that who was the guy you were quoting on social media today, who's trying a thing of telling people who routinely distort and warp history that history won't be kind to them.
Right.
They don't. What? What kind of threat is that? They don't believe in history. They don't care about history.
No, they don't.
Anyway, on that note, we should probably move on to the news, don't you think?
Well, I want to say that we're looking forward to our letter show next week. We're probably going to record that on Tuesday or Wednesday, just so we can have the house noise making. Middle child's coming home to cook us a vegan Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah.
And I'll be cooking us a regular Thanksgiving dinner in the basement. So,
Well, I figure we'll have turkey and the trimmings the following week when she's back at school.
We're a blended family in that
We are
way.
a blended family.
Yes. And we're blessed to have these
we're
great
gonna have
kids.
fun, and we hope you're all going to have a wonderful holiday weekend, regardless of whether you think Thanksgiving is a bad holiday to have because of Native Americans, or, and I know there's questions about that this year, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So just wanted you to know, we are looking forward to our letter show next week. We've received some letters correcting us. We have some letters with good ideas, and we have some letters that have constructive criticism. And we love them all. So we'd be sure to listen to that. We'd love to have you join us. All right. So let's do a news roundup, Driftglass.
Okay, well, this week, Joe Biden signed the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure plan into law. This is now the largest federal investment in infrastructure in more than a decade. In total, the measure contains $550 billion in new funds to improve the nation's highways, roads, bridges, ports, rail, pipes, and public transit systems, as well as upgrades to the electrical grid and expanding access to broadband internet.
Junior Dude went and filled his tank yesterday and found one of those stupid stickers on the gas tank of Joe Biden's finger pointing to the price of gas and saying, I did this. Apparently they're selling these everywhere. And someone pointed out to me on Twitter that in her area, gas prices are already going down. So once they go down, those stickers are still going to be there to say, I did this. You're not terribly bright there putting stickers up about things like that. And I said I want the stickers to go on roads and bridges and electric car factories.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did this.
We'll be doing that, yeah.
That's more to the point than gas prices, which are not set by the president, by the way.
And they're transitory, as you point out, whereas a bridge is going to be there a while.
Yep. Alert listener Jeff points out that these two stories appeared on the same day. Quote, Florida lawmakers block vaccine and test mandates. And number 2, Florida is the epicenter of the nation's HIV and opioid crisis.
Ratings agencies say that Joe Biden's spending plans will not add to inflationary pressure. U.S. President Joe Biden's infrastructure and social spending legislation will not add to inflationary pressures in the U.S. economy, economists and analysts in leading rating agencies told Reuters on Tuesday. Biden has spent the last few months promoting the merits of both pieces of legislation, his Build Back Better bill for $1.75 trillion and a separate $1 trillion infrastructure plan. The two pieces of legislation, quote, should not have any real material impact on inflation, said William Foster, who's vice president and senior credit officer at Moody's Investment Services, who is quoted in the Reuters article. Foster added that the impact of the spending packages on the fiscal deficit will be rather small, because they will be spread out over a relatively long time horizon.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics had one job.
Yeah. Yep.
Hat tip wonkat. They said they underestimated the June to September job growth by over 626,000 jobs, which is the largest underestimation in Bureau of Labor Statistics history.
Yeah. I read adjacent to that if they had just announced that number by itself as a month, it would be record breaking.
Yeah.
As a job growth all by itself. This should be the story. Honestly, in a sane timeline, it wouldn't be Christie. It would be like, holy shit. 626 million people got jobs during this period, and the economy is actually doing well, and inflation is ticking down.
We have right now a boom economy, and you know what happens during boom economies? You get a little bit of inflation.
You do. People want to buy more stuff, and they're decanting themselves from a year and a half, 2 years of lockdown, and they're looking around for stuff to do and places to go. And there's not enough to go around right now, because the ports are screwed up, which is something that, by the way, the infrastructure bill will take care of. For their hard work over the last few years crippling the U.S. Postal Service, top executives were paid more in bonuses and perks last year than at any other point in the past decade, adding up to $370,000 in extra income for Postmaster General Louis DeJoy and 4 of his deputies. This is according to the Center for Public Integrity. DeJoy got a $75,000 performance bonus in fiscal year 2021, plus around $56,000 in other perks, which include memberships in 2 airline clubs, retirement counseling, can't hurry that enough, and financial planning services.
Republican Representative Paul Gosar was censured by the House 223 to 207, and we all know why.
Yes, we do.
He's a violent psychopath.
He is.
2 Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, joined all Democrats in supporting the resolution.
Under your category of the midterms are going to be lit.
Lit.
This is from Raw's story. Dan Crenshaw slams Marjorie Taylor Greene's stupid plan as, quote, messy internal spats plague the House GOP. House Republicans are, quote, embroiled in messy internal spats and suffering from self-inflicted wounds that could hurt their chances of regaining the majority in 2022, Politico reported Wednesday night. There's a term for this, disarray. Something. I've heard it before. It doesn't come top of mind, but I know there's a word for it.
That's okay. They'll unite behind Hunter Biden's laptop by the time Election Day happens.
Yes, they will.
A judge sentenced Jacob Chansley of Arizona, the so-called QAnon shaman, to 41 months in prison in the Republican insurrection case. The sentence is 10 months shorter than prosecutors sought, but inside federal sentencing guidelines. The judge compared Chansley to Martin Luther King and then sent him to prison.
Oh, God, yeah. Okay. The Trump administration, it turned out, covered up a 2019 airstrike in Syria that killed 80 people, including women and children. Immediately following the strike, an Air Force lawyer reported the incident as a possible war crime to his chain of command, which required an independent investigation. The military, however, never conducted the investigation into the bombing.
But we had 13,000 stories about Benghazi.
Sure.
In 2017.
We had over 72 hearings on Benghazi.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was nearly half enough, Blue Gal, because we're going to get another 72 if they take the House back.
Yep. Steve Bannon surrendered to federal authorities 3 days after being indicted by a federal grand jury on 2 counts of contempt of Congress for refusing to answer questions from the House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riot. Each count of contempt of Congress is a misdemeanor punishable by up to 1 year in jail and a maximum fine of $100,000. He's trying to slow walk that, and the federal judge, who is a Trump appointee, told him no this morning. We're not going to slow walk this.
You know, if he were a real man, he'd want to go out like Cagney in a white heat. That's all I'm saying.
Mom,
that's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Top of the world, Mom.
Top of the world. Top of the world, Ma. Based on district remapping alone, so far Republicans have added a net 5 seats in the House based on redrawn district maps, and so far Democrats have lost 1 seat. In all, GOP-led legislators and governors will redraw 187 House districts compared to 75 for Democrats.
This following exchange took place between John Kennedy, scumbag Republican from Louisiana, and Dr. Saul Omarova, who is President Biden's nominee for Comptroller of the Currency. Senator John Kennedy said, "I don't know whether to call you professor or comrade." And someone off camera said, "Oh my goodness." Dr. Omarova gave a very long and articulate response to that. But the short version is, "I'm not a communist. I do not subscribe to that ideology. I could not choose where I was born." And she mentioned that her grandmother escaped death by Stalin twice. He's a pig.
I should also mention that Elizabeth Warren came as close as you're allowed to in the Senate to whacking him with a snow shovel.
Oh, good.
In her rebuttal to his, basically apologizing to her for her colleague being a filthy McCarthyite scumbag.
Good.
Which you're not allowed to say because you have to refer to your colleagues respectfully, which is one of the problems with our system.
And Sherrod Brown also said this is when Trumpism meets McCarthyism. He said that without mentioning names or individual senators. Yeah.
But he had a big foam finger pointing at John Kennedy and an air horn going, in case you need a hint. Right. In local news, and this is sort of the fallout from the national news, based on their voting records, this week we learned that both Rodney Davis and Darren LaHood are opposed to safe roads and bridges for Illinoisians. They're against making it possible for the children in rural areas to have access to high-speed internet. And they are objectively in favor of members of Congress threatening the lives of their colleagues.
It's okay if you're a Republican.
Sure, absolutely.
Each week we post to our Facebook page and website an Internet Kitty sent in by you, the listeners. This week's Internet Kitties are siblings, Clarice and Hannibal. They look a lot like, again, our Olive. They're little black kittens.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, life has not always been good for Clarice and Hannibal. And without going into too much detail, Clarice is missing a leg and Hannibal is missing a part of his ear.
Mm-hmm.
They had a tough beginning of their life. However, they have been rescued into a very happy forever home.
Oh.
And they are now way too busy playing to sit for formal photographs.
Busy. Sorry, no time.
No time at all. We sit still. Well, just try to catch us when you can with your camera. Mm-hmm. And of course, Clarice and Hannibal eat freshly poured cat food, our fake sponsor. Their owner says they're doing great. They're just fine. And they're perfectly happy kittens. They just were abandoned behind some sheriff's office somewhere and found and were in bad shape. So they're doing fine now. And like I said, they're in their forever home, and you should visit them at our Facebook page and website. And of course, Clarice and Hannibal eat freshly poured cat food, our fake sponsor. Whether you serve pet store perfection or dollar store direct, your cats will sit on the kitchen floor and demand that the food they eat is only freshly poured. Freshly poured, freshly poured. Oh, my Lord, it's freshly poured. And you can send your internet kitty, dog, or other pet to us at our email address, proleftpodcast@gmail.com, where you can also write to both of us. Feel free to write us. We love hearing from you. Next week is our letter show, so get those emails in.
Mail.
Yeah. Be aware that if you write us at any of our addresses, we reserve the right to read your email or U.S. Postal Service Go Postal Unions letter on the air unless you say otherwise. #JailToJoy. Don't forget our gourmet coffee guideline. If you can afford to buy an espresso-based or peppermint holiday beverage for yourself, buy one for us. This is not charity. This is our job, and it's a labor of love. Approximately 1% of our listeners support this podcast with a contribution. You can too. See our website, proleftpod.com, for details. Both our PayPal and postal address information, merch, all of it is there at proleftpod.com. Please share our show on social media. And if you love this podcast, please ask someone else to listen too. And thank you for doing that. Hey, Driftglass, how are the Internet Kitties doing this week?
Well, Blue Gal, the Internet Kitties are looking forward to the full beaver moon this evening because they're astronomy buffs and because beavers are delicious. By the way, the full beaver moon is a partial eclipse that's coming up tonight and tomorrow. It will be the longest partial eclipse in 500 years.
Mm.
And here's a fun fact about beavers that most of you probably didn't know. During the 17th century, the Catholic Church declared that beavers were fish so they could continue to be eaten on Fridays and during Lent.
Wow. How convenient.
Yeah, this is how theology often works. We want this thing. It doesn't really, our rules say no, but our tummies say yes.
And now Milo Yiannopoulos says he eats beavers.
Let's think about living. Let's think about loving. Let's think about the hooping and the hopping and the bopping and the loving, lovey-dovey. Let's forget about the whine and the crying, the shooting and the dying, and the fellow with a switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life.
The Professional F Podcast is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2021 DGBG Productions.